The silver Luna crown was still warm from Caleb's hands when Rowan placed it on someone else. No one noticed the thin white bandage wrapped around Caleb Moore's wrist, or the faint red stain blooming beneath it like a secret the room did not deserve to know. They were all looking at Meredith Hale, radiant beneath the chandeliers of Blood Moon Hall, her pale blonde hair arranged in perfect waves, her white satin gown catching every candle flame as if the whole pack had gathered only to watch her shine. Caleb stood near the back wall, where quiet Omegas were expected to stand, his shoulders straight, his face calm, his soft brown hair tucked behind one ear the way he always did when he was trying not to shake. Last night, while the pack slept through the storm, he had walked the borders alone with a lantern in one hand and a medical kit in the other, pressing his wounded wrist to the old scent stones until their failing glow steadied. He had told himself it was enough. Enough to keep the children from waking cold. Enough to keep the northern cabins safe. Enough to give Rowan one more peaceful morning before duty swallowed him whole. And now Rowan stood 12 feet away in his black ceremonial coat, silver eyes fixed forward, alpha posture perfect, voice low and steady as he named another Omega, the heart of Blackwell Pack. Meredith Hale will stand beside me as Luna. The hall erupted in approval. Applause rose like a wave Caleb could not step out of. Someone beside him sighed with relief. Someone whispered that this was the right choice, the strong choice, the beautiful choice. Caleb lowered his gaze to his hands. Earlier that morning, those same hands had stitched a loose seam on Rowan's sleeve because Rowan hated when fabric pulled at his shoulder during formal ceremonies. Caleb had left chamomile tea outside Rowan's door because the alpha always got headaches before public vows. He had even polished the small silver clasp at the back of the Luna crown, the one Meredith now touched with trembling fingers while the elders smiled as if the future had been saved. Rowan did not look at Caleb. That was the part that hurt with such quiet precision. Not the crown. Not the applause. Not even Meredith's soft, grateful smile. It was the way Rowan's jaw tightened, the way his hand curled once at his side, as if some part of him knew exactly where Caleb stood but lacked the courage to turn. Caleb remembered that same hand guiding a frightened pup across an icy bridge last winter. He remembered it covering Caleb's own when the pantry shelves collapsed and they laughed in the flour dust like ordinary people with ordinary lives. He remembered Rowan saying, in a voice meant for no one else, "You make this place feel less impossible." Caleb had believed him. Foolishly. Tenderly. Completely. The elder beside Meredith lifted a glass and called for the pack to honor its new Luna. Everyone moved forward. Caleb moved back. One step. Then another. The bandage around his wrist pulsed beneath his sleeve, but he did not wince. Quiet Omegas learned early how to carry pain without making it inconvenient. Across the hall, a little boy named Mason searched the crowd and found Caleb's face. His smile faded. Caleb gave him the smallest nod, the kind he used at bedtime when the pup was scared of thunder. "I'm here," it said. "You're safe." But even as Caleb offered that silent promise, something inside him finally stopped reaching. The bond in his chest, that soft, golden thread he had protected for years, pulled once toward Rowan and met only distance. Meredith stepped closer to Rowan for the blessing. Their shoulders nearly touched. The crowd cheered again. Caleb slipped a hand into his pocket and felt the small wooden ring Rowan had carved for him during a snowed-in patrol cabin night, before politics, before elders, before Caleb learned that being loved in private did not mean being chosen in public. He closed his fingers around it until the edges pressed into his palm. Then he bowed his head, because no one could accuse him of causing a scene if all he did was disappear inside his own silence. When Meredith passed by later, glowing and nervous, Caleb smiled at her first. "Congratulations," he said, and his voice did not break. Rowan heard it. Caleb knew he did, because the alpha scent shifted for one brief second, sharp with regret. But regret was not protection. Regret was not a vow. Regret did not undo the sound of a whole pack choosing someone else while Caleb stood there with his blood drying beneath a clean white sleeve. So when the ceremony ended and the hall emptied into music, wine, and bright conversation, Caleb returned to the kitchen alone. He washed the teacup Rowan had left untouched. He packed fresh bandages into a small canvas bag. He wrote Mason hates carrots unless they are hidden in stew on the first page of a notebook titled If I Am Gone. And just before dawn, while Blackwell Pack slept beneath the shield he had saved for them, Caleb Moore placed the wooden ring on Rowan's desk and walked toward the border without looking back. By the time the first gray line of morning touched the pine trees, Caleb had already learned how loud silence could be. It followed him down the service hallway, past the laundry room where someone had left a basket of damp towels waiting for him, past the pantry door with its crooked hinge that only he remembered to lift before closing, past the row of little booths outside the children's dormitory. He paused there longer than he meant to. Mason's boots were on the wrong feet again, left tucked into right, right tucked into left, because the boy insisted it made them ready to run faster. Caleb almost fixed them. His hand lifted out of habit, then stopped halfway. The shame of it warmed his face, sudden and foolish. He was leaving, and still some part of him wanted to make the morning easier for everyone else. He drew his hand back and pressed it against the strap of his canvas bag. It held almost nothing. 2 shirts. A half-empty bottle of pain medicine. Nora's letters tied with blue thread. The notebook he had started in the kitchen. He had written 6 pages before his vision blurred, not from tears exactly, but from the tired ache that came when a person finally admitted they were not as strong as everyone needed them to be. In neat, careful lines he had listed the small things no council meeting had ever cared about. Mrs. Bell takes her tea with honey when her hands shake. Peter lies when his ankle hurts, check his left boot after patrol. The South Nursery. Window sticks during rain. Rowan forgets to eat before full moon meetings. That last note had made him stop. He had stared at Rowan's name for a long time, the pencil hovering above the page, waiting for anger to come. It never did. Only embarrassment. A soft, humiliating grief that made him feel like he had been caught holding on to something already thrown away. So he crossed out the sentence until the paper nearly tore. Now, at the back entrance of the pack house, Caleb stood with his fingers on the brass handle and listened. Behind him, the building breathed in its sleep. Pipes clicked softly in the walls. Someone coughed on the second floor. A floorboard shifted in the eastern wing, probably one of the night guards ending patrol. Ordinary sounds. Home sounds. That was the cruelest part. Nothing looked ruined. The hallway did not know his life had split open. The old rug still curled at the corner. The family photos still lined the wall, all silver frames and solemn alpha faces. There was even a half-finished mug of cocoa on the windowsill, left by one of the teenagers who thought Caleb never noticed. He noticed everything. He wished, just once, he had noticed less. Outside, the cold air met him like a clean hand against a fevered forehead. It was late spring, but the hour before sunrise still held a bite, especially this far north. Caleb pulled his jacket tighter and stepped onto the gravel path. 50 yards ahead, the first sandstone glowed weakly beside the gate, pale blue under a skin of frost. He should have walked straight past it. Instead, he crouched, set down his bag, and peeled the bandage from his wrist. The wound beneath was shallow, but angry from being reopened too many times. Caleb looked at it with a strange, detached calm. Last night, he had told himself it would be the final time. One last repair. One last invisible service. One last proof that loving a place did not mean it knew how to love him back. He touched 2 fingers to the stone. The light flickered, then steadied. A quiet pulse moved through the boundary, soft as a sleeping child's breath. Caleb swallowed hard. "Stay safe," he whispered, though he was not sure whether he meant a pack, the children, or the man asleep upstairs with a wooden ring on his desk. Then he stood and walked beyond the gate. For the first time in 7 years, no patrol stopped him. No elder called his name. No alpha voice asked where he was going. That should have made it easier. It did not. Half a mile down the road, where the forest thinned and the town bus sign leaned crookedly beside a ditch, Caleb finally allowed himself to look back. Blackwell Pack House rose against the dim sky, broad and proud and full of windows that would soon catch the sun. One window on the 3rd floor glowed amber. Rowan's office. Caleb's breath caught before he could stop it. For one reckless second, he wondered if Rowan was awake. If he had found the ring. If regret had finally become heavy enough to move his feet. The light went out. Caleb turned away so quickly he nearly stumbled. His cheeks burned, and this time the tears came, silent and hot, slipping down before he could wipe them clean. He sat on the cold metal bench beneath the bus sign, wrapped both arms around his bag, and tried to make himself smaller than the morning. In his pocket, his phone buzzed once. Caleb froze. The screen showed no name, only a message from the PAC emergency system. Boundary fluctuation detected. Report to Luna office immediately. Caleb stared at those words until the letters blurred. Then, from somewhere deep inside the woods behind him, every scentstone along the northern ridge went dark at once. The first person to notice Caleb was gone was not Rowan. It was Mason, standing barefoot in the children's hallway with his pajama sleeves hanging past his hands and one boot clutched against his chest. He had woken from a bad dream, as he often did when the border stones flickered, and padded down to the kitchen expecting to find Caleb humming under his breath while the kettle warmed. Instead, the kitchen was dark. The blue mug was missing from its hook. The honey jar sat closed, untouched, exactly where Caleb had left it. Mason did not understand why that felt wrong, only that the whole room seemed to be holding its breath. Upstairs, Rowan Blackwell woke before his alarm with a sharp, unfamiliar cold spreading through his chest. He sat up in bed, his hand already pressed over his sternum, as if he could physically catch whatever had just slipped away. For a moment, he thought it was the boundary. Then he smelled the room. No chamomile outside the door. No faint trace of clean linen and rain from Caleb passing quietly through the hall. Only polished wood, cold ash, and the fading perfume of last night's ceremony. His eyes went to the desk across the room. The wooden ring sat in the center of it. Small. Plain. Devastating. Rowan crossed the room without remembering how he got there. He picked it up between two fingers, and the memory struck him with almost cruel gentleness. A patrol cabin buried under 3 feet of snow, Caleb laughing softly because Rowan had carved the ring too small the first time, Rowan pretending annoyance while secretly carving another by firelight just to keep Caleb smiling. "It is not a promise," Rowan had said back then, too proud to name what it was. Caleb had looked at him with those quiet gray-blue eyes and answered, "Then I will not ask it to be." Now the ring felt weightless in Rowan's palm, and somehow heavier than the crown he had placed on Meredith's neck. A knock sounded at the office door. Before Rowan could speak, Meredith stepped in, already dressed in the pale blue morning suit the elders had chosen for her first day as Luna. She looked flawless. She also looked frightened. "The northern ridge went dark," she said. "The council wants me in the Luna office." Rowan closed his fist around the ring. "Then go." His voice came out colder than he intended. Meredith noticed. Her gaze dropped briefly to his hand. "Is that his?" Rowan did not answer, and the silence became its own confession. Something moved behind Meredith in the hallway. Mason stood there, small and pale, staring straight at Rowan. "Where is Caleb?" The question cut through every formal title in the house. Meredith turned, softening at once. "Sweetheart, he is probably just resting." Mason shook his head. "Caleb rests in the kitchen chair. Not in his room." Rowan moved past Meredith before she finished drawing breath. He took the stairs 2 at a time, crossed the west corridor, and opened Caleb's door without knocking. The room was neat in the painful way of someone who had never owned enough to make a mess. A narrow bed. A folded sweater. A cracked ceramic dish filled with buttons. On the pillow lay a small stack of envelopes, each labeled in Caleb's careful handwriting. For Mrs. Bell. For Peter. For the nursery. For Rowan. Rowan reached for his, but Meredith's voice stopped him from the doorway. "Maybe he left because he misunderstood." Rowan looked back so sharply she took half a step away. The public alpha in him wanted to say something controlled, something suitable, something that would keep the walls from hearing weakness. But the private man, the one Caleb had known in kitchens and snowstorms and quiet hours after midnight, could not hold the mask steady. "No," Rowan said, low and rough. He understood perfectly. Meredith's expression changed. Not jealousy. Not anger. Something closer to dawning discomfort. In the hall below, an alarm bell began to ring, not loud, but steady. Boundary failure. Rowan opened Caleb's envelope with fingers that did not feel like his own. Inside was one page. Not a goodbye. Not an accusation. A list. You get headaches when you skip breakfast. Mason needs the blue cup after nightmares. The East Hall window leaks in heavy rain. Please do not let them make Meredith carry everything alone. At the very bottom, beneath a line that had been written, scratched out, and written again, Caleb had added one final sentence. I was tired, Rowan, and you looked right through me. Boundary logs marked the last stone Caleb had touched near the county bus road, and Rowan followed that fading trace like a man chasing the last honest thing in his life. He stood in the small room with Meredith behind him, Mason crying silently in the doorway, and the northern alarm pulsing through the floorboards. Then, faint but unmistakable, Caleb's scent brushed the open window from the direction of the road, thin as a thread about to break. Rowan turned toward it, and for the first time since the ceremony, he let the entire pack see panic on his face. Caleb did not know the pack house was in chaos behind him. At the bus stop, the world had narrowed to the dead glow of his phone screen, the cold metal bench beneath him, and the long dark line of pine trees where the northern scent stones had gone out one by one. For several seconds he simply stared. Then the emergency system buzzed again. Report to Luna office immediately. Caleb laughed once under his breath, but it came out wrong, small and broken. That is new, he whispered. I get promoted after I leave. The joke should have helped. It did not. His wrist ached beneath the fresh wrap he had made from the last clean strip in his bag. He pressed his sleeve over it and stood, looking toward the road where the county bus was supposed to arrive at 5:15. The sign said so, anyway. Caleb had lived near that sign for 7 years and never once seen the bus arrive on time. The ordinary unfairness of that almost made him cry again. Behind him, something shifted in the trees. Caleb went still. Not fear, exactly. More like the old instinct to be useful before being safe. A figure stepped out from the fog near the ditch, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a paper coffee cup in one hand and a toolbox in the other. He had pale skin, sandy blonde hair flattened on one side as if he had slept in a truck, and the calm, tired posture of someone who had seen too many dawn emergencies to be impressed by another one. His scent marked him as alpha, but it was muted, steady, nothing like the suffocating dominance Caleb had learned to brace against in council halls. The stranger stopped a careful 10 feet away. His eyes moved to Caleb's wrist, then to the dead ridge lights behind him, then back to Caleb's face. Morning, he said. Bad time to ask if you are the reason half the border just sighed like a haunted refrigerator? Caleb blinked. The words were so absurdly specific that for one dangerous second, his body forgot how tired it was. I am sorry. Elias Grant, the man said, lifting the coffee cup slightly like a peace offering. Border clinic. Part-time doctor, part-time electrician, apparently full-time witness to people making terrible life choices before sunrise. He nodded toward Caleb's wrist. You are bleeding through your sleeve. Caleb pulled his arm closer to his chest. I am fine. Elias did not move toward him. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Not the alpha scent, not the broad shoulders, not the medical bag half hidden beside the toolbox. The stillness. The restraint. That is usually what people say right before they fall over. Elias replied. For the record, I prefer paperwork after breakfast. Caleb should have refused. He should have walked away, kept moving, made it to town, found a cheap motel where nobody knew his name and nobody expected him to hold their walls together with his own body. But the road tilted slightly beneath his feet. His fingers went cold around the strap of his bag. Elias set the coffee on the ground between them and raised both hands empty. I will not touch you without permission. The sentence landed harder than it should have. Caleb looked away too quickly, embarrassed by the sudden heat behind his eyes. Such a small thing. Such a basic thing. And yet no one at Blackwell had said it to him in years. Can you check the wound? Caleb asked, barely above a whisper. Elias nodded once. Yes. He approached slowly, like a person coming near a skittish animal and hating that someone had made it skittish. He crouched on the gravel, opened his medical kit, and waited until Caleb held out his wrist. The bandage came away sticky and red at the edges. Elias's expression changed, not with shock, but recognition. This is not from an accident. Caleb swallowed. It is not what you think. I have seen wounds like this before. If I had to guess, someone has been using your scent bond to stabilize stones that should have been maintained by trained wardens. Caleb stared at him. Elias sighed. So, unfortunately, it is exactly what I think. The first headlights appeared far down the road. For one breath, Caleb thought it was the bus. Then the engine sound reached him, low and fast, too expensive, too familiar. Elias rose without crowding him, placing himself slightly between Caleb and the road as a black pack vehicle broke through the fog. He did not puff himself up. He did not claim anything. He simply stood there, calm as a locked door. Caleb's chest tightened. Through the windshield, Rowan's silver eyes found him before the car had fully stopped. Relief flashed across Rowan's face first. Then his gaze dropped to Elias standing close, to Caleb's newly exposed wrist, to the coffee cup on the ground between them. Something unreadable passed through him. Caleb braced for anger. For command. For the old pull of alpha and pack and home. Instead, Rowan stepped out into the gray dawn holding the wooden ring in his hand, and his voice, when it came, was not cold at all. Caleb, he said, rough and quiet. Please tell me what they made you do. For a moment, no one moved. The black pack vehicle sat crooked at the edge of the road, its headlights cutting pale tunnels through the fog. Rowan stood beside the open door with the wooden ring in his hand, dressed in yesterday's ceremonial coat, the silver clasp still crooked because Caleb had not been there to fix it a second time. That tiny mistake almost undid him. Caleb looked at the uneven fabric at Rowan's shoulder and hated the reflexive thought that rose inside him. He wanted to smooth it flat. He wanted to step closer, tug the seam into place, and make Rowan look ready for a world that always demanded too much of him. Instead, Caleb folded his wounded wrist against his chest and stayed behind Elias. Not hidden. Just not alone. Rowan noticed the difference. His face tightened as if the distance had finally become something he could see. Caleb, he said again, softer this time. Tell me what happened. Caleb let out a slow breath. You were there. Rowan flinched. Elias glanced between them, then bent to pick up the coffee cup from the gravel. I am going to stand exactly here and pretend this coffee is fascinating, he said dryly. Nobody make me do emotional security work before 6 in the morning. It was such a strange, ordinary complaint that Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Rowan saw that too, and something painful moved behind his eyes. Maybe jealousy. Maybe grief. Maybe the first clear understanding that Caleb still had pieces of himself Rowan had not earned the right to touch. Caleb looked past him toward the road, toward the pack house hidden beyond the trees. When my parents died, your father let Nora and me stay because my mother had served Blackwell for 20 years. I was 15. Nora was 7. She had asthma so bad she slept sitting up most nights. I learned which pharmacies would let me split payments. I learned how to stretch soup with potatoes. I learned that if I was quiet, grateful, and useful, no one remembered we were charity cases. Rowan's hand closed tighter around the ring. You were never charity. Caleb's laugh was faint and empty. That is easy to say from the side of the table where people serve you dinner. The words landed between them with more force than anger would have. Rowan looked away first. Caleb hated that he still felt guilty for hurting him. That was the old habit, the one carved deepest. Protect Rowan from discomfort. Protect the children from fear. Protect the elders from consequences. Protect the pack from knowing the price of its own comfort. He swallowed and continued because if he stopped now, he might never say it again. The first time the boundary stones failed, Elder Marlowe told me I had the right kind of bond. Not strong enough to lead, he said. Just useful enough to patch cracks until a proper Luna was chosen. He said it was temporary. He said Nora's medicine fund could be reviewed if I cooperated. Rowan's head snapped back to him. He threatened Nora? He never had to say it that plainly. Caleb looked down at his shoes, scuffed at the toes from years of running errands through snow and mud. That is the thing about people with power. They can ruin your life politely. Elias went very still beside him. Rowan's scent shifted, sharp and storm-dark, but he did not step forward. Caleb was grateful for that. Furious, too. Too late, Rowan was finally learning restraint. "Why did you not tell me?" Rowan asked. Caleb looked at him then, really looked at him, at the alpha everyone feared, the man Caleb had once trusted with every small, breakable part of himself. "I tried." Rowan's mouth parted, but no sound came. "3 times," Caleb said. "Once in the pantry, when you were late for a council meeting. Once after Nora's fever broke and I asked if we could talk privately. Once last winter, in your office, when I said the stones were hurting me. The fog moved around them. Somewhere far off, a bird called once, then fell quiet. Caleb's voice did not rise. It did not need to. You kissed my forehead, handed me your coat, and told me I worried too much." Rowan's face went pale. Caleb saw the memory reach him. The fire in the office. The snow against the windows. Rowan wrapping his coat around Caleb's shoulders like tenderness could substitute for listening. At the time, Caleb had held the wool collar to his cheek after Rowan left, embarrassed by how little kindness it took to keep him loyal. "I thought I was protecting you from pack politics," Rowan said, each word rough. "No," Caleb answered. "You were protecting yourself from choosing." That was the moment the county bus finally arrived, brakes squealing softly as it rolled out of the fog 20 minutes late like the world's least dramatic escape plan. The driver opened the door and looked at the 3 pale, exhausted people on the roadside. "Anyone getting on, or is this one of those family things?" Elias murmured. "America's public transportation, arriving late and emotionally inconvenient." Caleb almost laughed again, but his eyes burned instead. Rowan looked at the bus, then at Caleb's bag, then back at Caleb. For the first time, he did not command. He did not reach. He simply stepped aside, leaving the path open. "I will not stop you," Rowan said. His voice shook on the last word. Caleb's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. Behind Rowan, a call came through the vehicle speaker, Meredith's voice thin with panic. "Rowan, the nursery ward just failed. The children are asking for Caleb." Caleb closed his eyes. The old instinct rose instantly, fierce and aching. Go back. Fix it. Be useful. Be good. Be needed. Elias, quiet beside him, said, "You can care about them without letting everyone use that care against you." Caleb opened his eyes. Rowan stood frozen, the ring in his palm, Meredith's fear crackling through the speaker, the bus doors waiting. And Caleb realized the most painful truth of all. Leaving had not made him stop loving them. It had only shown him how little love had protected him in return. Caleb did not get on the bus. The driver waited exactly 7 seconds, then sighed with the tired patience of a man who had seen too many roadside disasters before sunrise and pulled the doors shut. As the bus groaned away, Caleb stood with his bag against his hip and hated how relieved everyone looked. Rowan hit it the fastest, smoothing his face back into that cold alpha mask the pack trusted. But Caleb had seen the flash in his eyes. Relief. Hope. Maybe even victory. As if Caleb staying on the roadside for one more minute meant he had chosen to come home. He had not. "I am going to the nursery," Caleb said before Rowan could speak. "After that, I am leaving with Dr. Grant." Rowan's gaze moved to Elias. Something hard settled over his expression. "Dr. Grant," he repeated, quiet enough to be polite and cold enough to frost glass. Elias lifted one hand. "That is me. Licensed, sleep-deprived, and currently wishing I had brought a second coffee." The humor did not reach Rowan. "This is pack business." Caleb felt the sentence land like a door closing. Pack business. The same phrase elders used when they sent Omegas out of rooms. The same phrase Rowan had used for years when he thought he was sparing Caleb from ugly decisions. Caleb looked at him until Rowan's jaw tightened. "No," Caleb said. "It is my body, my bond, and my choice. That makes it my business." For the first time, Rowan had no answer. They did not leave right away. For almost a minute, Caleb stood on the roadside with the bus fumes fading, the black pack vehicle idling ahead of him, and Elias's old pickup waiting behind him. It was not enough time to heal anything. It was only enough time for Caleb to understand that going back to help did not mean going back to belong. Then they rode back in separate vehicles. Rowan drove ahead in the black pack car, while Caleb sat in Elias's battered pickup with the heater clicking unevenly and a dashboard full of gas station receipts. There was a tiny plastic dinosaur glued near the radio. Caleb stared at it because it was easier than looking at the road home. Elias noticed. "My niece put that there," he said. "She said? Every medical emergency needs a dinosaur supervisor." Caleb's mouth softened despite himself. "She sounds practical." Terrifyingly. Then Elias let the silence return, which Caleb appreciated more than questions. By the time they reached Blackwell Packhouse, morning had fully arrived. People stood in clusters outside, wrapped in coats and confusion. No one rushed them at first. That almost made it worse, because the whole pack seemed caught between fear, shame, and the need for Caleb to fix both. Whispers moved faster than the fog. Caleb caught pieces as he stepped from the truck. He ran away. The new Luna failed already. Rowan found him with a rogue Alpha. Maybe Caleb planned this. Maybe he wanted the pack to beg. Shame climbed the back of Caleb's neck, hot and familiar. He kept his eyes down, but that only made the voices sharper. Someone said Meredith's name with pity. Someone said Rowan's with disappointment. Then an older beta muttered, "Quiet ones are always hiding something." Caleb stopped walking. Not because the word surprised him, but because part of him was so tired that even an old insult felt heavy enough to pin him in place. Before he could force his feet forward, Elias moved, not in front of Caleb this time, but beside him. Close enough to be seen. Far enough not to claim. "Interesting theory," Elias said mildly, looking at the gathered pack. "In my experience, quiet people usually hide exhaustion. Loud people usually hide guilt." No one answered. A few looked away. It was not a grand defense. No raised voice. No dramatic challenge. Somehow, that made it worse for them and easier for Caleb to breathe. Rowan watched from the stairs, his face unreadable, but Caleb saw his hand curl once at his side. Jealousy would have been simpler. Anger too. Instead, Rowan looked like a man forced to witness someone else doing gently what he should have done fiercely years ago. Inside the nursery, the children were huddled together under quilts, the room colder than it should have been. Mason ran to Caleb so fast his mismatched boots slapped the floor in uneven beats. Caleb knelt before the boy reached him, careful not to use his wounded hand, and let Mason crash into his shoulder. "You left," Mason whispered. Caleb closed his eyes. That accusation hurt more than the adult's whispers. "I know. Did we do something bad?" "No." Caleb pulled back just enough to look at him. "Never. Grown-ups made a mess. That is not yours to carry." Across the room, Meredith stood near the window, pale and shaken, the silver Luna collar bright against her throat. She looked younger without the crowd cheering for her. Less like a rival. More like another person trapped in a role too large and too cold. "I tried," she said softly. "I could not hear them. I could not feel what was wrong." Caleb nodded. "Because the bond was never yours." Her eyes filled, but she did not argue. Then the nursery door opened, and Elder Marlowe entered with 2 council members behind him. His smile was calm, polished, almost kind. "Caleb," he said, as if greeting a troublesome child. "There has been a misunderstanding. The pack is grateful for your service, but leaving during a boundary crisis could be viewed as abandonment." The room went silent. Rowan stepped forward. "Marlowe." The elder did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Caleb. "Of course, if you return to your duties quietly, no formal accusation needs to be made." Caleb felt every child watching him. Meredith's hand rose to the collar at her throat. Elias went still by the wall. Rowan looked ready to speak, but Caleb lifted his good hand before he could. Not to protect Marlowe. Not this time. To protect himself from being saved before he was heard. Caleb met the elder's eyes and felt the old fear rise, then settle. "No," he said. One word. Small. Clear. His own. Marlowe's smile thinned. "Think carefully." Caleb did. He thought of Nora's medicine invoices, Rowan's untouched tea, Mason's boots, the wooden ring, the bus leaving without him. Then he turned to Meredith and said, "Take off the collar." Meredith froze. Rowan whispered, "Caleb." Caleb did not look away from the silver around Meredith's throat. "If they want to accuse someone of abandoning Aluna's duty," he said, voice quiet but steady, "then first they can explain why they put the wrong person in chains." Meredith did not move at first. Her fingers rested on the silver collar, as if it had suddenly become too heavy to understand. The nursery was so quiet Caleb could hear the heater ticking in the wall and Mason breathing against his sleeve. Elder Marlowe's smile stayed in place, but the warmth had drained from it. "That collar was blessed before the entire pack," he said. "Removing it now would insult the Council, the Alpha, and the tradition that has protected Blackwell for generations." Caleb looked at Rowan then. Not for permission. Not for rescue. Just to see what he would do with one more chance. Rowan stood near the door, pale and rigid, the wooden ring still in his hand. His eyes were on Marlowe, but his silence stretched a second too long. Caleb felt that second like a familiar bruise being pressed. Of course. Even now, some part of Rowan was measuring fallout, elders, alliances, the fragile machinery of power. Meredith saw it too. Her face changed in a small, heartbreaking way. Meredith's fingers trembled at her throat, not with pride now, but with the memory of her mother telling her to smile no matter what the elders asked of her. She unclasped the collar herself. The click was soft, barely louder than a button falling on hardwood, but every adult in the room seemed to hear it like a crack through the floor. She held the silver circle in both hands and looked at Caleb. "I thought being chosen meant I was wanted," she whispered. "I did not know it meant someone else had been erased." Caleb's throat tightened. He had expected resentment from her. Maybe pride. Maybe fear. Not this. Not the quiet honesty of another person realizing she had been dressed in someone else's pain. Meredith walked past Rowan and placed the collar on the little table beside Mason's dinosaur night light. It looked ridiculous there, all polished silver and old ceremony next to a chipped green stegosaurus wearing a sticker crown. Under different circumstances, Caleb might have laughed. Instead, he felt strangely hollow. Marlowe's voice sharpened. "Miss Hale, you are overwhelmed. Caleb has always had a gift for appearing harmless while creating dependency." Rowan moved then, one step forward. "Enough." The word was low, controlled, and dangerous in its restraint. Marlowe finally turned to him. "Alpha, with respect, your attachment to this Omega has already clouded your judgment. We chose stability. We chose bloodline. We chose a Luna the pack could respect." Caleb looked down. There it was. The clean, polished truth beneath every polite decision. Respect. Not care. Not love. Not the child who slept better after Caleb sang the same old folk song 3 times. Not Mrs. Bell's trembling hands wrapped around a warm mug. Not Nora coughing into her pillow while Caleb counted pills under a bare kitchen bulb and prayed the bottle would last until Friday. Respect meant posture. Family name. A face that looked right beside Rowan in photographs. Caleb had spent 7 years becoming necessary, and they had still found him embarrassing. Rowan's voice came from very far away. "Say that again." Marlowe, confident in old power, did. "The pack needed someone worthy of standing beside you." Caleb closed his eyes. The sentence should not have surprised him. It should not have hurt more than the ceremony, more than the whispers, more than the empty bus stop. But it did because it gave shape to the fear he had carried since 15 years old, standing in the Blackwell kitchen with Nora's inhaler in his pocket, promising he would be no trouble. No matter how much he gave, some part of them had always believed he was a favor. When Caleb opened his eyes, Rowan was staring at him, and the horror on his face was almost unbearable. He had heard it too late. Not just Marlowe's words, but the years beneath them. Caleb gently unwound Mason's arms from his sleeve and stood. The room shifted with him. "I am done proving I can be useful enough to deserve kindness," he said. His voice was soft. That made the words sharper. He reached into his canvas bag and took out the blue thread bundle of Nora's letters. Then he removed the small brass key to the pack infirmary, the one he had carried on a cord around his neck for years. He placed it beside the silver collar. One small key. One discarded crown. Somehow they looked like the same kind of prison. Rowan stepped toward him. "Caleb, please." Caleb looked at the wooden ring in Rowan's hand. "Keep it," he said. "You were right the first time. It was never a promise." Rowan stopped as if the air had gone solid. Elias opened the nursery door without a word, offering Caleb the hallway, the choice, the space to leave without being chased. Meredith wiped her eyes and turned toward the children, shielding them from the council's stares with her own body. Caleb walked past Rowan close enough to feel the warmth of him, close enough to remember every night he had mistaken nearness for devotion. Rowan did not touch him. That, at least, he had finally learned. At the end of the hallway, Caleb paused beneath the family portraits of alphas who had been painted larger than life. None of them looked down at him. They never had. Behind him, Rowan said, barely audible, "I should have chosen you." Caleb did not turn around. "No," he answered. "You should have defended me before choosing became public." Then he kept walking, and for the first time, the pack house did not feel like home losing him. It felt like a house realizing the door had been left open too long. Caleb left through the front doors this time. Not the servant's entrance, not the side gate, not the shadowed path behind the laundry room where he had carried baskets and secrets for years. He walked past the main staircase with his canvas bag over one shoulder, and every conversation in the foyer died as he passed. No one blocked him. No one knew how. Elias followed a few steps behind, close enough to be present, far enough to make it clear Caleb was not being taken anywhere. That small distance made Rowan feel worse than any challenge could have. From the top of the stairs, Rowan watched Caleb cross the threshold into the pale afternoon light, and the public alpha in him understood that everyone was watching. His council. His warriors. The children clustered near the nursery hall. Meredith standing with the silver collar no longer at her throat. They expected command from him. Explanation. Damage control. But all Rowan could see was the loose thread on Caleb's sweater cuff, the one Caleb had been meaning to mend for 3 weeks because he always fixed everyone else's clothes. First. The door closed. Quietly. That was the sound that stayed. Not a slam. Not a dramatic exit. Just wood meeting frame with ordinary finality. Rowan stood there until Meredith came down the stairs and stopped beside him. She did not look like a Luna now. She looked like a young woman wearing someone else's grief and finally understanding the fit was wrong. "He left his room very neat," she said. Rowan did not answer. "That is usually how people leave when they do not expect to be invited back." Her words were not cruel. That made them harder to hear. Rowan went to Caleb's room because he did not know where else to put his hands, his breathing, the useless ring still pressed into his palm. The room smelled faintly of rain, clean cotton, and the lavender soap Caleb bought from the grocery store in town because it was cheaper in packs of 3. Rowan had once teased him about smelling like a laundry aisle. Caleb had smiled and said, "At least laundry aisles are organized." Rowan had forgotten that until now. The bed was made. The blanket tucked with hospital corners, probably a habit from caring for Nora during long clinic stays. On the desk sat a chipped mug filled with pencils, a stack of folded receipts, and a phone charger wrapped carefully with a twist tie. In the top drawer, Rowan found the things Caleb had not taken. Birthday cards from the children. A grocery list with peanut butter, cough syrup, and discount cereal written in Caleb's slanted hand. A movie ticket stub from the one night Rowan had taken him into town, and pretended it was not a date because pretending made cowardice look like caution. Beneath it all was Caleb's old phone, the screen cracked across one corner. Rowan touched the power button. It lit up. No passcode. Caleb had never thought he had anything worth hiding. The messages opened to Rowan's name. Drafts. Dozens of them. "Rowan, can we talk after council?" Deleted before sending. "Rowan, the stones hurt more when it rains." Deleted. "Rowan, I know the pack needs Meredith, but I need to know if there was ever a place for me that was not just useful." Deleted. The last one had been typed at 3:42 that morning. "Rowan, I am leaving. Before I start begging to be kept." Rowan sat down on the edge of the bed because his legs no longer trusted him. In the doorway, Mason appeared with his mismatched boots fixed properly for once. He held the blue cup in both hands. Is Caleb mad at us? Rowan looked at the child and found no alpha answer big enough to hide behind. No, he said. His voice was rough. He is tired because we let him be tired alone. Mason thought about that with the serious frown of a child trying to understand adult failure. Then he walked in and placed the blue cup on Caleb's desk. For when he comes back. Rowan closed his eyes. That hurt more than Marlowe's insults, more than the council's lies, more than the boundary alarms still pulsing low through the pack house. Hope from a child was unbearably clean. Downstairs, Meredith's voice rose in the foyer. Calm but firm. Rowan stepped into the hall and looked over the railing. Elder Marlowe stood with 2 council members near the front doors, speaking to a group of worried pack members. The Omega is unstable, Marlowe said smoothly. Dr. Grant is an outside influence. We must protect the pack's reputation before rumor spreads. For years, Rowan had mistaken that tone for wisdom. Now he heard the poison in its polish. Meredith stepped between Marlowe and the crowd. No, she said. You want to protect your reputation. Caleb protected the pack. People turned. Marlowe's face tightened. Rowan descended the stairs slowly, every step measured, every eye shifting to him. This was the public moment he had failed before. The room waited for him to soften the truth, to make it diplomatic, to keep power comfortable. Rowan stopped beside Meredith. Elder Marlowe is relieved of council duty pending a full review, he said. The foyer went still. Marlowe's smile vanished. You would shame the council for an Omega who abandoned his post? Rowan opened his hand. The wooden ring lay in his palm, small and plain before the entire pack. No, Rowan said. I am shaming myself because I called love private while I let cruelty become policy. No one spoke. Outside, far beyond the windows, a truck engine started near the gate. Rowan turned toward the sound. But he did not run after it. Not yet. On Caleb's desk upstairs, the blue cup waited beside a phone full of messages never sent. Caleb did not hear Rowan's confession in the foyer. By then, he was already in Elias's pickup, watching Blackwell Packhouse shrink in the side mirror until it became a gray shape between the pines. He expected to feel triumph. Or freedom. Something bright enough to justify how much leaving hurt. Instead, he felt tired in a deeply ordinary way. His wrist throbbed. His stomach was empty. There was a coffee stain on the knee of his jeans from the cup Elias had handed him, and he had forgotten to drink. The world did not become new just because he finally chose himself. It simply became quieter. Elias drove without asking where Caleb wanted to go for the first 5 miles. Then, at the fork where one road curved back toward town and the other stretched west toward the county line, he slowed. Clinic has a spare room, he said. It has ugly curtains, a heater with opinions, and a toaster that burns only one side of the bread. Very exclusive. Caleb looked at him, and for the first time all day, a real smile touched his mouth. Small, but his own. Sounds terrible. It is. But nobody there will call your exhaustion duty. That sentence settled in the truck like a blanket. Caleb turned his face toward the window before Elias could see his eyes fill. Behind them, the pack house vanished completely. 3 days later, Rowan found the letter in Caleb's room because Mason insisted the blue cup needed a note beside it. It had been tucked under the chipped mug of pencils, sealed but not hidden. Rowan stood by the desk for a long time before opening it. The handwriting was steady. Dear Rowan, if you are reading this, it means I left and you are trying to understand it as an event instead of a pattern. Please do not do that. I did not leave because of one ceremony. I left because I became a habit everyone mistook for a person. I left because children should not learn that love means disappearing quietly so others can stay comfortable. I left because Nora once asked me if I would still be kind if no one ever thanked me, and I said yes, but I forgot to ask whether kindness was allowed to have a limit. Rowan had to stop there. Outside the open door, Mason sat on the floor with a coloring book, pretending not to watch him. Meredith had taken over the nursery schedule by then, not as Luna, but as herself. She was clumsy with the bedtime songs and terrible at hiding carrots in stew, but the children liked that she admitted when she did not know something. Mrs. Bell had begun teaching younger betas how to mend uniforms. Peter finally reported his ankle pain without Caleb having to notice it first. The pack was not fixed. It was learning. Slowly. Awkwardly. With less grace than Caleb had given them for free. Rowan read the rest of the letter alone that night. I loved you. I think part of me still will for a long time. But love is not a room I can live in if I am only safe there when the door is closed. Do not come after me to ask for forgiveness you have not yet learned how to carry. If you change, let it be because the pack deserve better from you, not because you hope change will bring me home. And please make sure Mason keeps his boots on the right feet. He argues, but he trips less. Rowan laughed then, once, broken and wet, with the letter trembling in his hands. It was such a Caleb thing to do, to leave heartbreak and practical childcare in the same paragraph. For months Caleb did not return. The border stones were repaired properly by trained wardens. Elder Marlowe faced the review he had avoided for years. Nora moved to a better clinic with PAC funds that no longer came with conditions. Rowan stopped sitting at the head of every table and started listening before speaking. Sometimes, at dawn, he would stand by the gate with the wooden ring in his coat pocket, not waiting exactly, but remembering the cost of being too late. Autumn came softly. One Saturday, a plain envelope arrived at the pack house with no return address. Inside was a photograph. Caleb stood outside the border clinic in a gray sweater, pale hair wind-touched, cheeks pink from the cold. Mason's blue cup sat on the porch rail beside him, mailed months earlier by a child who believed objects could find their way home better than people. On the back, Caleb had written one line. I am safe, and I am learning what peace feels like. Rowan carried the photograph to the nursery, where Mason looked at it, and smiled so hard his eyes watered. He looks happy, the boy said. Rowan nodded, even though the word hurt. He does. That evening, Rowan placed the photograph on Caleb's old desk, not as a shrine, not as a claim, but as proof that someone they loved had survived them. The blue cup was gone. The room was still empty. But for the first time, the emptiness did not feel like punishment. It felt like a boundary Caleb had drawn and everyone else was finally learning to respect. Far west of Blackwell Land, Caleb sat on the clinic porch while Elias argued with the one-sided toaster through the open kitchen window. The sunset turned the road gold. Caleb wrapped both hands around a warm mug and listened to the quiet without fearing it. He did not know whether he would ever go back. He only knew that, when dawn came now, he no longer had to vanish to be free.